Hi, my name is Zach, and this is my video essay. In 1994, Max Horkheimer and Theodore Adorno created the Dialectic of Enlightenment. In it, they argued that the masses are being deceived by an industry that creates cultural content that is standardized and designed in a way that we should not question the status quo. Horkheimer and Adorno were both scholars from the Frankfurt School, a school of thought for leftist scholars, and both had fled Germany after the rise of Adolf Hitler increased political violence and anti-intellectualism. Both men also argued that the media was controlled by advertising and commercial imperatives, which served the interests of the elites, and this control ultimately made us subservient to the consumer capitalist ideology. Both Adorno and Horkheimer had previously written papers like this, with the most influential being Horkheimer's Marxist Traditional and Critical Theory from 1937, which argued that traditional theories are created to maintain the hegemonic ideology, whilst critical theory criticizes the ideology and exposes the injustices and lies surrounding it. The Frankfurt School was originally founded for the study of Marxism, and this Marxist ideology is present within Adorno and Horkheimer's theory, as they argue that all forms of cultural products, ranging from films to music and literature, are cogs in a capitalist system of production, as they are not only meant for profit but also adapted to the needs of the capitalist system which pacifies society. This theory, coined as a theory about a culture industry, can still be seen as relevant in the media despite being over 60 years old, as the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or the MCU, still displays many of the traits of Adorno and Horkheimer's theory, especially the use of repeated content and the consumerist ideology affiliated with the brand. However, the culture industry theory of Adorno and Horkheimer is subverted in the media in many films, both old and new, as the classic zombie horror Night of the Living Dead was revolutionary for the horror genre when it released, going against the argument created by Adorno and Horkheimer that media had become formulaic and similar. Similarly, Bong Joon-ho's Mickey 17 contrasts the argument that mainstream media repeatedly reinforces consumer capitalist ideologies, therefore showing the limitations of Adorno and Horkheimer's statement. When Adorno and Horkheimer produced their theory, a capitalist ideology was present in mainstream media to prevent audiences from turning to communism during the Second Red Scare and the beginning of the Cold War. However, a capitalist ideology is present in mainstream media in modern Western societies due to it being the hegemony, therefore making it naturally reinforced in mainstream texts. This is evident within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as films within the franchise frequently protect capitalist and pro-American interests, therefore influencing audiences that this is the norm within society and demonstrating the effects of the hegemony on media. The mainstream nature of the MCU helps it to conform to capitalist and consumer ideologies, as there is a large marketable aspect of the MCU, with merchandise ranging from toys to clothing, with arguments being made that MCU movies are now only made to sell the next piece of merchandise. The MCU can be seen as aligning with Adorno and Horkheimer's theory, as many films maintain a pro-American or pro-American military stance. This is evident in both a literal and metaphorical sense. In a literal sense, it is through the US Department of Defense giving Marvel access to military bases and equipment for filming in exchange for a positive portrayal of the US military in the MCU, which is the case for many of their films. Yet, this surface-level evidence does not prove Adorno and Horkheimer's theory to be present within the MCU. So, how is it? Whilst direct portrayals of the US military are limited, viewing the MCU's poster team, the Avengers, as a metaphor for the military makes Adorno and Horkheimer's theory extremely noticeable within the MCU. The Avengers become a clear metaphor for the military as they are a nearly all-American, all-white superhero team that was created by and works for part of the American government. Therefore, through the use of the Avengers, Marvel is able to promote pro-American military viewpoints as the superheroes are accepted as a source of moral authority. One example of how pro-American military ideology is present within Marvel would be through the 2016 film Captain America Civil War. The film centers around the conflict between the Avengers as they are split on whether they should or shouldn't sign the Sokovia Accords. This was a set of laws created by the UN that would place the Avengers under the supervision of a UN Council, which would then decide where the Avengers are deployed to. One side, led by Iron Man, accepts this control. However, it's the titular character and protagonist Captain America who resists his control and leads the other side, saying the Avengers should be the only ones to decide where they are deployed and which fights they involve themselves in, creating a civil war between the Avengers. It is no coincidence that Captain America, a superhero that represents American idealism, is the one that opposes the UN control, as it suggests to the audience that this is a morally correct choice. This reflects the real-world actions of the American military, as there is a history of America intervening in other countries' conflicts, with the most recent example being the US intervention in the conflict between Israel and Iran in June 2025. Adorno and Horkheimer's culture industry theory is also proven to still be relevant in more recent Marvel films, such as the 2025 Captain America Brave New World. This continues a pro-US military message through Captain America initially working with the military in the film, something he had done as a Falcon in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. However, Brave New World goes a step further than just creating a pro-military message. It possibly supports US President Donald Trump through the character of Thaddeus Ross. Ross, the US President in the MCU, was an antagonist in previous MCU films, being one of the main factors in the split of the Avengers by pushing for the Sokovia Accords and becoming a danger by becoming the Red Hulk in Brave New World. Despite this, Captain America, again the character who defines what America should be, chooses to forgive Ross for his past actions against the Avengers and his crimes as Red Hulk, which presents a pro-Trump message in Brave New World, as this film's release was not long after Donald Trump had just been sworn in as President of America. The message of Brave New World, that we should forgive the President for his crimes, can relate to Trump, as he was himself convicted of 34 counts of falsifying business records before he won the election in 2024, proving Adorno and Horkheimer to still be relevant due to the mainstream media creating messages that support presidencies. This isn't the only way that the MCU conforms to Adorno and Horkheimer's theory. The balance between profit and art is shown as Marvel often tips in favour of profit, as content produced by Marvel can be seen as low effort, while merchandise is prioritised. This prioritisation can be seen for the vast amounts of merchandise produced for each MCU film. There are posters, Funko Pops, action figures, clothing and more, all of which help to promote the next Marvel film, showing Marvel's need to appeal to the mainstream stems from commercialist priorities such as profits. Adorno and Horkheimer argue in their theory of culture industry that mainstream media has become formulaic and is ultimately the same. Despite being labelled as different media products, the MCU makes this theory evident through a common critique that almost all MCU films are extremely formulaic. Most films tend to follow a similar structure. Heroes will lose before overcoming obstacles to win. Therefore, Adorno and Horkheimer are still prevalent within modern contemporary society, as the MCU is formulaic, repeating structures in all their films, while also reinforcing a capitalist ideology as well as a pro-American one. However, many films also contradict Adorno and Horkheimer's culture industry argument, going against the formulaic structure and capitalist ideology that both men warn against. A mainstream Bong Joon-ho film, Mickey 17, goes against Adorno and Horkheimer's theory, as the film adopts quite a Marxist perspective, showing the upper class as viewing the working class as replaceable. This is demonstrated as Mickey's job is titled Expendable, and throughout the opening sequences of the film, Mickey is brutally killed several times in experiments for science, with almost no one showing any care for him. Furthermore, in a later scene where Mickey appears to be dying, the only objection that upper-class characters have against shooting Mickey, to put him out of his misery, is the mess the blood will make on their carpet. The idea that the upper class view the working class as expendable, as easily replicable instruments for something that they will never truly benefit from, is an almost textbook Marxist viewpoint adopted by Bong Joon-ho, therefore showing that not all mainstream films promote a capitalist ideology. However, it's not just recent films that have been shown to subvert Adorno and Horkheimer. George Romero's classic, Night of the Living Dead, was groundbreaking for the horror genre. It redefined what zombies were, how they behaved, and how they killed. Not at all a formulaic approach to a zombie film. More crucially, the film had major political undertones, evident through the two main protagonists, who were a woman and an African-American man. Giving minorities such a major role was groundbreaking not just for the horror genre, but for cinema altogether. These political undertones were explored further through the depictions of divisions in the country. It was American versus American as undead masses became a threat, referring to the hostile political tensions of the 1960s as there were political movements and assassinations. One example of this is the ghetto riots that occurred in the summers of 1964 to 1969, sparked by police brutality and the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., which led to over 200 deaths. Adorno and Horkheimer's theory is subverted within Night of the Living Dead due to the uniqueness of the film at the time, defining the horror genre and giving minorities the roles of protagonists, contrasting the 1960s mainstream focus on white people. To conclude, the Frankfurt School's ideas are still relevant within modern contemporary society, as Adorno and Horkheimer's culture industry theory is relevant through the MCU reinforcing mainstream capitalist ideologies in their products, as well as promoting positive imagery of the American military and its actions through the use of the Avengers. Furthermore, the commercial interest of the MCU means that it can prioritise profits over quality of media products, further proving Adorno and Horkheimer to be relevant, which is shown through a formulaic structure of MCU films. However, there are several films that prove Adorno and Horkheimer's theory incorrect, with Mickey 17's Marxist ideology contrasting the capitalist one mentioned by Adorno and Horkheimer, and Night of the Living Dead breaking away from horror tropes and defining new ones. This is significant as it suggests that society is breaking away from the capitalist ideology that was so dominant in the 1940s, possibly due to the ending of the Cold War, meaning that capitalism won. making it the dominant ideology in most countries and therefore exposing its flaws to those capitalist countries. It could also be due to the disillusionment of the American dream, a key symbol of capitalism, with society harbouring a much more cynical view now to the idea of the American dream because of how often the message, hard work will achieve success, has been proven wrong. Therefore, Adorno and Horkheimer's theory can still be seen as relevant in modern contemporary society to an extent, as whilst it is relevant in many mainstream cultures, other mainstream products have demonstrated to reject the culture industry theory.